Hey guys, I hope you guys are having a better afternoon than me. The weather outside is rather gloomy, hence why we are inside today. But today we're talking about the Texas rig, the many different ways you can rig it up, modify it, and then the second half of this video is going to be about how to fish it and the different strategies behind fishing it and kind of how to catch fish using the Texas rig. So first, let's define exactly what a Texas rig. So here I have a Texas rig, and it is really mostly just the way that you put a soft plastic on a hook. That's really what defines a Texas rig. So on this bait, I'm going to take it off real quick. So I have a soft plastic bait and a hook. So essentially what I'm doing here is I'm going to thread the soft plastic on here in a manner that makes it Texas rig. And in this way, it is going to be a weedless bait. Just real quickly, you essentially put it in about a ½ inch, pull it back out. Then you're gonna you thread it up the hook, then you're gonna do a twist, half twist, as you pull it up over the eye. And then you're gonna measure it up here on where it's gonna penetrate through. So I don't know if you guys can see that. Let's see, this way. It's going to penetrate through right there. So I'm going to do it the way I'm normally going to do it. I just put my fingernail right where it's going to go through, and then I just stab it at a 90-degree angle all the way through the bait. So at this point, the bait is Texas rigged but not Tex-posed, which means we're just going to put the hook end in the plastic there, and now we have a weedless bait. Now that's how you define a Texas rig. Now there's many different ways you can rig it up with a pegged weight, a weight, no peg, no weight, different baits, and different hooks. So I'm going to get into that real quick. So with my example bait here, we're going to talk about the weight first. The weight obviously is to help this bait fall faster through the water column. And the only reason you need it to fall faster through the water column is either the fish are biting on a faster fall, or you're really trying to fish the bottom of your pond or lake. So that's why you would want to put a weight on it. Now, why would you want to peg it? Well, so the weight doesn't slide very far, or 3 or 4 feet down as you cast it and it does its first fall. Otherwise, the bait will fall slower, and then the weight will fall down first, and then follow, and then you're going to have to pick up the slack between the weight and your bait. So that's why typically when I fish with a Texas rig that's weighted, I typically have a little plastic peg on here. You simply can buy these in a little kit here, just like here. You thread it in one of the little wires, and then you pull it out, and then you will have a peg on your line. It moves up and down freely. I'll show you guys that real quick. So I have this peg on here right there. I can just simply pull it. It takes a little bit of force to pull it, and then pull it back down. And yeah, it's going to move from time to time just a little bit, but after about every 10 or 15 casts, you can always pull it back down or pull it back up, just depending on which way it fell. So next we're going to talk about the weights that you can put on it. The weight that you just saw was a 1/4 ounce tungsten weight. This one is a 3/8 ounce painted tungsten weight. You can also use lead weights. Nothing wrong with using lead weights. This is a 1/4 ounce lead, and this is a 1/4 ounce painted lead. It doesn't really matter what weight you use. Just note that lead is going to have more drag because it is going to be larger for the same amount of weight. So I mean, it's going to fall a little slower than a tungsten weight. I really only like to use tungsten weights in the real heavy stuff, but I do every now and then buy a few of the lighter ones just to keep in my tackle box. And I do like to use them, so not to knock that, but hey, lead weights are just going to catch as many fish as these tungsten weights will. So there is a weightless option that you can fish with. This is extremely useful during the summertime in a shallow pond or a grassy pond or some grassy submerged grass that's below the surface. It's a great way to fish that efficiently and effectively and not get snagged up all the time. So if you want to fish without a weight, it's really great in those small local farm ponds. It's also great around that grass. Now back to the weighted options. You do have one more choice with the weighted options, and that is whether or not you're going to use a bead behind it. Now, what does this bead do? Well, I'll kind of give you an example here. We're going to pretend like this bead is on here. So it's going to be below your weight, just like that. So we got our bead right below the weight, and as you go through the water column or you pop the bait, this little weight is going to clack against it. I don't know if you guys can hear that, but it's just going to make a little bit of noise to attract those fish. Now, I rarely do that. And that's because I usually don't fish that dirty of water. When you're fishing really dirty water, you're going to want to make a little bit of noise with your Texas rig to attract your fish's attention to your bait. Now we're talking like chocolate milk water. That's probably about the only scenario that I would consider it. I'm sure others of you may have success in other scenarios, but for the most part, I find it more beneficial to fish without the little plastic bead. And that's just my preference, but you can figure out what you like by experimenting with it. Okay, finally, we are down to the hooks. So I have 3 different hook options here. The option that I used to prefer the most was this extra wide gap hook. Now, extra wide gap is really just referring to the distance between the point and the shank. So in a worm hook, this is a round bend worm hook with a offset eye. That distance is not nearly the same, even on the same size hook. I don't know how well you guys can see that, but there's a lot more distance here. And many people believe that, hey, that gives the fish more room to bite and get a hook into them. And this one has its own strategies behind it as well, and we'll get to that in a minute. This is typically my first option. If you're new to Texas rigging, this is really easy to Texas rig because the point is in line with the eye, and it's really easy to text pose and not worry about getting snagged. So this is a really great option if you're starting out. The next one was a round bend worm hook. Now this one, when you Texas rig it, will look a little differently than the example that I gave you previously, and I'll talk about that here in a minute. But this one will have essentially a little bit of an angle going through the bait, and you're going to have it just below the surface of the plastic. So when a fish does bite down, the hook will penetrate into its mouth, and you'll be able to get that fish in. This is the belief behind it because it is at an angle. It's easier to get a hook into a fish. Typically, this is used on worms. Hence why it's called a worm hook. Mainly because worms are typically pretty large and pretty hard for the fish to fit in their entire mouth. That's why they use these hooks on worms quite a bit. And lastly, we have what I call a hybrid hook. This is actually a hammer hook from the Guggen Squad. I've really started using this one more lately and really started to play with it and see how it works. It's not exactly an extra wide gap hook because the point is not in line with the eye, but it does have a little extra gap versus the round bend. So I like to think of this as more of a hybrid hook, kind of between the round bend and the extra wide gap. So I've been playing around with this guy. So far, I really like fishing with it, and it's done a really good job for me. I've only missed a few fish, and mostly that's my fault for doing little wimpy hook sets. So I want to keep using it, but you guys feel free to experiment with any of the 3 hooks. So the last part, well, next to the last part, is I want to talk about the baits that we can use. So here is a Senko, a bubblegum pink Senko. we have a ribbon tail worm. This is a small one. You can fish them in many different sizes, all the way up to 15 inches long. This one is probably a 7-incher. We have a creature bait, a crawl bait, and we also have a lizard, a beautiful lizard here. So those are just some examples of some of the baits that we can use. I want to spend a minute and show you guys how to rig a Texas rig on some of these baits. So we're going to start off with a crawl. Probably one of the most common fished baits other than the Cinco there. So we're going to show you guys real quickly. It's going to be similar to what I did earlier. We're going to put the hook point in the center of the bait. We're going to push it in about a 1/2 inch and come straight out. And as we come up the shank, we're going to do a half twist to get the hook all the way up through the eye. You usually want to go past the eye a little bit. There you go. You would have this tied onto your line, so it wouldn't be a big deal. And then we're going to kind of size up where the hook is going to go through the soft plastic. I like to put my fingernail there. That way I can just guide it with my fingernail, my thumbnail there, just guide it straight through. And right now we're in a perfectly straight line with our soft plastic. And the last thing you're going to have to do is just skin hook a little bit of that. Way you skin hook it is you just give it a little pinch here and pull it toward the eye, and then give it a little hook like that. Real simple, real easy. Extra wide gap is probably the easiest one to rig. Next, we're going to do the round bend worm hook. What other bait better to do that on than the worm? So in this bait format, we're not going to go directly into the bait. We're actually going to go across it a little bit. So I don't know if you got how well you guys can see, but we're going to go across the bait just like that. So we went kind of like a 45 through it. And we're going to do that half twist thing again. Now we have a really, really good angle to go through this bait. So instead of like on the extra wide gap hook here, we're not going to go directly through it. We actually need to look at an angle that we can come through the bait and have it slightly under the surface. So I can see my angle here. I'm going to look at it from the other side. And we're going to try that angle right there. Takes a little bit more work, a little more effort. I missed that one. I don't use round bend worm hooks very often, so you guys will have to forgive me. There we go. And just like that, it is rigged correctly. And just under the surface here, we have our little hook point. It kind of slightly bites my finger if I touch it. And you can see that the shank here is not in line with the bait. It is at an angle, and that same angle is penetrating through the bait. Just a real simple way to do a worm there. And the last one is we have our hybrid hook. This one I am going to rig more like the extra wide gap hook. So we have a Cinco here. Obviously you don't want to do it through the thin end. You want to do it through the fat end. Once again, about a 1/2 inch through the center, just directly down the center. Come out the side. As we come down the shank, do a half twist and come up through the eye of the hook. We're going to measure it out and kind of see where we need to go through. Use our thumbnail as a guide, so we just follow that and go right through the center. Get a little text pose there. And there we go. Here is our hybrid hook, the hammer hook. Texas rigged on a Cinco. Still has plenty of room for plenty of action, and is a pretty good looking bait. All right guys, so pretty much that sums up all the modifications and the different ways of rigging a Texas rig that I know. There's obviously many different types of soft plastics out there, so feel free to experiment with those new soft plastic, new baits, all the time. I enjoy experimenting with new baits on the Texas rig all the time. So feel free to try that out. Obviously, there's more to Texas rigging than just rigging it. So let's get out on the water and let me show you guys how to fish it and the different strategies behind fishing the Texas rig. Okay guys, so we're out here fishing the Texas rig. As you could tell probably by the first part of the video, well, I showed you how to rig one up, the many different options you have while rigging one up. And today we're gonna finish this video by talking about ways to fish it. So first way here, simple, we're just gonna give it a cast. Boom, a good long cast, decently long cast. We're gonna put that on spot lock for a second. But decently long cast, and now we have to retrieve. We let the bait sink all the way to the bottom, and we want to give it a hop. Give it a hop. Whether it's 2 little hops or 1 big hop, give it some hops. Depending on the time of year, the aggressiveness of the fish will determine the kind of cadence you need to do. And you just want to make it hop off the bottom and come back down. And you're just looking to trigger at least someone to look at the bait. You want a fish to look at it, and then you may do a hop at just the right time to trigger a bite. So second way, real easy way, probably more suitable for ponds that don't have a whole lot of structure, and it's just to simply just let it drag on the bottom. Just let it drag. Let it drag slowly, and just keep reeling slowly, and then stop. You're making a little mud trail. You're making something that a fish can follow. Slowly reel it in some more. And there you go. That's that technique. Now, this is probably better for when the fishing is really, really slow, really, really tough. You just want to slowly drag it on the bottom. And then when you're out here in an area like I am right now, you want to take it, and you're going to want to do a precise, we get the hook exposed here, it feels like. You're going to want to do a precise cast to a piece of structure or cover. And this is in case is cover. I use these words interchangeably. In case you don't know, a little education piece here for you. Cover is something that the fish is going to hide against. So like a log, a rock, a brush pile, or something. Structure is a lake feature, like a point, a ledge, a pond dam, something like that. But anyways, for this part of the technique, you're going to want to make precise casts near cover. And I always say structure, but you want to make sure you use the right word. I want to use the wrong word all the time. So just make a precise cast, boom, right there. So in order to make this cast really precise and make sure that bait falls straight down, right next to that piece of cover, you're going to want to pull out a little line and make sure that bait falls straight down. If you don't do that, the bait's going to pendulum toward you, and you're not going to be at the base of that cover anymore. You're going to be a few feet out, and that's not what you want. Fish are going to be either located right next to the cover, maybe a little out, but if you come from behind them, they're more likely to bite it. And if you fall in front of them and they can see it's like, that's not worth my time, that's not what you want. You want to be from behind and be able to pull out in front of them and kind of startle them, trigger them into a bite. Now that technique is called pitching. Actually, it's called flipping. This is flipping. Pitching is where you have the line here and you dip it out there and then you let it fall. That's more of a pitch. Regardless of the type of technique we're using here. There is a fifth technique. If you have a weightless bait, you can throw it out here over grass, and then you're going to let it sink part of the way down. And I like doing this over grass. This is the technique I like to do over or around grass. You have it weedless, and then you just, as it falls, you're going to give it some pops, reel it in, give it some pops. It's like fishing a fluke or a jerkbait in a way, but just over that grass in a weedless style. So that's a weedless technique. You can do that also in ponds that have lots of grass, lakes that have grass. That's a really good place to do it. A weedless technique is also, or a weightless technique is also very good in shallow ponds that have cover like this. So you really have a slow fall. So those are some options there. Those are your really probably the 5 main techniques. I think it was 5, but 5 main techniques there that I like to use to fish a Texas rig. Now we're over here. I do a cast. Now more than likely, on a cast that's toward a piece of cover, the fish is going to hit it on the fall, the very first fall, and we're going to have to be line watchers. We're going to watch our lines, and we see a jump or a bounce or the line to start to take off. Well, that's our cue to give it a good old hook set. Other techniques. Oh, I'm all hung up now. That's great. But anyways, other ways that you're going to feel bites. You're actually going to feel the bite. So you're going to be like reeling it in, or you're doing some hops and something doesn't feel right. That's also your cue to set the hook. But it also can be a piece of cover like I'm hung on now. So I'm going to come back in a second. I'm going to go get this and we'll continue this session. Okay, so the last piece here is we talked about all the techniques here on ways to fish the Texas rig, and we've talked about what a bite feels like. Well, the last part here is how do you set the hook? It's going to depend on your gear. So right now I got 12-pound test on a medium heavy rod. It's got a fast action tip. So I can lay into the wood a pretty good amount. I'm not going to want to, really try to rip the bait out real hard and break my line. So you always have to be in mind of what you have on your setup. So if I'm fishing 8-pound test with a little bitty hook, well, all I got to do is give it a good, well, let's throw this guy out there so I can give you a better example here. All I got to do is take it from this position to this position. And I'm already hung again, so I don't know. I guess today's the day I'm going to get hung a lot. But just always keep in mind, whatever bait you have, whatever setup you're fishing Texas rig, you want to be in control of your hook set. So if I'm fishing 20-pound fluorocarbon with a 5/0 hook, with a big bait, a big weight, yeah, I'm probably going to give that almost all that I got in a hook set, because I know I have to penetrate that hook into the fish's mouth. Now, if I don't retie or tie properly, yeah, I'm probably going to end up losing that fish by breaking off. So I need to make sure that I'm using all the right gear that's adequate for whatever technique I'm using. So on this setup, I'm not going to use a 5/0 hook. 12-pound test and a medium heavy rod is probably not the right technique. You pick out whatever technique fits whatever situation you're fishing. Today, water temps 69 degrees. Fish should be pretty active. In this area, we are probably near or at spawn. So I'm going to try to fish a little shallower, find some areas where fish can be have their backs to the bank and feel pretty safe. And that's how I'm going to be fishing a lot of today. But then if that doesn't work out, we'll adjust our technique. We'll fish a little deeper, a little shallower, and sometimes the Texas rig is not the bait to be using. So just always keep that in mind. The Texas rig is a solid option almost all the time, but it's not the option. Now let's go catch us a fish real quick so I can kind of show you everything in action and kind of what a fish looks like when it's hooked and all that good stuff. Okay, we're still trying to catch our Texas rig fish here. I'm a little surprised I hadn't been able to get one up, but although I've only been fishing for probably about 30 minutes, so a large majority of it has been just a little bit of play, as in giving you guys some tips. Got one. Ah, dang it. I didn't set the hook good. I thought it was hung on a stick. Y'all saw me set the hook like crap. Can't believe I missed that fish, guys. It's all me right there. Poor hook set. Get in the boat. Come here. You're not giant, but dadgummit, you're a fish. First fish of the day. Definitely not a giant, but dadgummit. Well, dadgum. You just want to fly around? Come here, buddy. A little male. Hasn't spawned yet. You can look at his tail. He looks good. So he's getting ready. He's up there messing around. All right. Woo! I was getting a little frustrated there, guys. I don't know if you could tell. All right, guys. So I didn't catch any more than that one, but the Texas rig may not be the best option today. We do have quite a bit of a breeze. So just wanted to show you guys the Texas rig, a few ways to fish it, and how effective it can be, even if you don't know exactly what the fish are doing that day. You can experiment with it, you can play with it, and you will probably catch a few fish on it. I should have had 3. I only had 1 because of me. I made some mistakes, but hey, you guys learn from my mistakes and don't make those again. So you guys just remember, just like always, until next time, get out there and go catch you some fish.